Build the Bourbon Podcast. I'm Brent. I'm here with my co-hosts Brian and Chuck, and we're glad to be back in the turret. Isn't it nice, fellas?
It's a cozy place. It's a pretty mild day. It's about 65 degrees here in Kentucky. I'm just glad to be here.
Glad to be here on what would have been Albert Blanton's birthday. February 28th is when we're recording this. Happy birthday, Albert, and to your ghost in Rickhouse C. Hope everything is well and that you're not too harsh on the tourists today. Lots of news going on in the world of bourbon.
MGP Ingredients, big contract distiller with a lot of their operations out of Shelbyville, Indiana. They are a publicly held company, and they released their 2022 results. They actually had a sales decline in 2019, which surprised me. But since then, they have acquired Luxco, and they have a stake in Limestone Branch down in Lebanon, Kentucky. Their revenues were up 25%. Their net income, their net profit for the year, more than $250 million.
Wow.
That's pretty awesome. So MGP is known as a big contract distiller. They have the big former Seagram distillery in Shelbyville, Indiana, near Cincinnati. That a lot of people, if they have a new distillery, they don't have any aged product yet, you can go to MGP and buy aged product. You can buy new distillate from various mash bills. So a lot of companies have used them at some stage. I'm told that Angel's Envy used to use MGP product. I don't think they do anymore. Surprised to learn fairly recently, Bullet Rye is an MGP product, even though they have a big new distillery in, I think it's Shelbyville, Kentucky. That Bullet Rye is an MGP product. So MGP doing okay for itself.
They're doing pretty well. And, their profits may be going up even more since they store product in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. If you read House Bill 5 that's currently in committee in the Commonwealth, they may be phasing out the property taxes on barrels that are being stored, which go that tax revenue goes to the counties where they're being stored. So some counties standing to lose millions of dollars for those schools and roads and that sort of thing.
Libraries.
Yeah.
The fire department, which is a huge asset to the bourbon community with the fires and so forth. So that would be a big hit for those communities.
Yeah. So the counties are worried, but of course the distillers are saying, you're killing jobs with all these taxes and nobody else has these laws. So either get rid of them or we're going to have to take our bourbon elsewhere. I don't know that that's going to happen, but it's an interesting bill to watch.
So I'm wondering if the taxes go down on a barrel of bourbon, does that mean that the retail price might go down? I don't know, Brian.
I doubt it. When Trump was in office, they implemented tariffs on Irish whiskey, and then those were amended recently, and the price has yet to come down, and I've asked, and it doesn't seem like they're going to come back down. So I would be surprised if the bourbon prices went down. I just think MGP and other distillers will make more money.
A girl can dream anyway.
That's
Anytime.
Right. One thing I found interesting about that article is I was shocked when MGP bought out Luxco. And the reason I was shocked is because Luxco had just built that brand new, beautiful distillery in Bardstown. And a lot of people believe the reason they did so is so that the back of the label they can put distilled in Kentucky as opposed to distilled in Indiana. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But the verdict's still out if they'll do that or not.
Interesting. Well, speaking of labels, any new labels hitting the market?
Yeah, Brent. So it seems like every week there's a new label hitting the market. This time it's coming out of Heaven Hill Whiskey Distillery. Bernheim Barrel Proof is being released in February. It hadn't hit the shelves in Kentucky, at least at my liquor store yet, but it comes in at barrel proof, 7 to 9 years of age, and it joins Larceny and Elijah Craig as the other two Heaven Hill brands that have a barrel proof bourbon.
Cool. All right. Very good. Well, the one last piece of news that at least I have, and you guys may have some more, but there's another world's greatest bourbon list out there. And I found it interesting because I hadn't heard of 3/4 of the bourbons that are on here. So this is from the Bourbon Flight. It's the world's whiskey award winners for 2023. And I'll just run through a few of them. World's Best Bourbon, W.L. Weller CYPB. Owned a bottle of that before. Don't know I'll ever own another one again.
I don't. I would say that's not my favorite bourbon to come out of that distillery, Buffalo Trace.
Yeah. We are always interested in finished bourbons, and they said the world's best finished bourbon is one I've never heard of, not heard of. I've heard of this one, but I've never had it. Broken Barrel Whiskey Cask Strength. And there's a best single barrel, and Brian, you're going to be happy about this. It's one of your favorites, 1792 single.
Yes, it is one of my favorites, although I was surprised that it made the list. I would like to see what they stacked 1792 up against, whether single barrels they stacked up against.
Yeah. I mean, have they heard of VH Taylor? I don't know. And then the last category that I have here is the world's best small batch bourbon, which they list Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. And we all have Elijah Craig probably at our house.
For sure.
It's good bourbon. I like it. I don't know that I reach for it as often as I reach for a few other brands, but there you go. That's the list. Now, what I think we should do is have a Distilled Bourbon Podcast World's Best Bourbon competition. Because, I mean, we carry as much weight as these guys, I'm sure. Or not.
Based off your opinion, I would agree with
off of
that.
our opinion, absolutely. So here's what we need to do. We need you to send us emails. You can do that at info@distilledbourbonpodcast.com or Brent@distilledbourbonpodcast.com. Send us a Facebook message or just leave us a comment on one of our posts on Facebook and tell us what your absolute world's best bourbon is. And we'll put those somehow together and we'll put it out there for a vote, or maybe we'll just decide. I'm sure it'll be non-scientific, but for whatever it is, there will be by the end of the year, a Distilled Bourbon Podcast, World's Best Bourbon.
It'll be fun.
Speaking of best bourbon, a lot of people say the best bourbon comes from right here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Well, most of it does. Everyone seems to use the figure that 95% of bourbon comes from Kentucky, but a lot of people out there think that 100% of bourbon comes from Kentucky, and they think that it's by law. Absolutely not the case. Bourbon can be made anywhere in the United States, but only the United States.
You think people get confused by the legal term, Kentucky straight bourbon?
Well, of course, that's one label that can be applied if it meets, certain requirements by law.
And that does have to be made in Kentucky.
It does.
But the word bourbon by itself is a general category.
Yeah, you could have an Ohio straight bourbon if it met all of the requirements. Anyway, I have had some what I'll refer to as foreign bourbon. I've had some when I was in Portland, Oregon. I got a Portland bourbon that was quite nice. I had a nice visit with a distillery in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. They made a bourbon. It was very nice. Certainly, I've had Indiana bourbon, and not just from MGP. There's a little dusty little distillery called Dusty Barn, and boy, there's never been a more aptly named distillery. But they've got nice product and good folks over there. So anyway, today we're going to try some non-Kentucky bourbons.
I like it. Sounds good. So what's the first one we've got poured up here?
Okay, so our first one is Wyoming whiskey.
That's, did you say that was an 80 proof?
This is an 88 proof bourbon, and this one's a little bit of a mystery to me. What I do know is that Wyoming whiskey started about a decade ago, and their original master distiller was Steve Nally, who was the retired master distiller at Maker's Mark, and I believe he's now the master distiller at Bardstown Bourbon. So, unsurprisingly, the original product to come out of Wyoming whiskey was a wheated bourbon.
Makes sense.
Maker's Mark is a wheated bourbon, and I know that eventually they did come out with some rye bourbons. At their website, this particular bottle, this is a 5-year-old bottle, 88 proof. Is described as the original Wyoming whiskey, which should mean it's a wheated whiskey. It says nothing on the website. It says nothing on the bottle. So all we can do is try it and see if it seems wheated or if it just seems good to us.
You would think that wheated bourbon would be advertised as such.
It's a big advertising point for a lot of bourbons,
right.
Although I don't know that Maker's Mark says wheated, does it?
I don't think it does.
I don't think it does. It's everybody
good
knows
point.
It's implied, yeah.
I don't know that Weller necessarily says wheated.
I think Weller does.
Okay.
Yeah, the green label. And
This
if I'm
is
wrong, message us, let us know.
this is very interesting. There's something different here, and I don't know what it is.
This does not remind me of Maker's Mark.
No.
Nothing in the world reminds me of Maker's Mark. It's growing on me.
Yeah. It's been open for a minute now.
I would not have thought that this was a wheated bourbon. I think this is a whiskey that would hold up very nicely in a cocktail. I'd like to have this in a Manhattan.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good drink. It's intriguing to me, the distillers I've been to outside of Kentucky, a lot of them use smaller barrels. Is that your experience?
I know of even one in Kentucky, Hartfield in Paris, Kentucky. They use smaller, like, I don't know, 15
or 25 gallon.
Yeah. The idea is that the liquid has more contact with the char of the barrel, which
more
is where
surface area,
the color and most of the flavor comes from. So they're reasoning that with a smaller barrel, they can age it faster. This has an age statement of 5 years, so that's beyond bottled and bond. So plenty of time to have aged it. I have no idea what size barrel they use, but they're big enough that I found this bottle in your store in Henderson, Kentucky. So they've got distribution. Do you know much about Wyoming whiskey?
I don't know much about it at all. We actually had an event a few years ago at one of the local restaurants here doing a bourbon tasting, and there was a couple from Wyoming that was telling me about this great bourbon, and I'd never had it, so I researched it and brought the bourbon in. That's actually the bourbon we're tasting here today, Wyoming whiskey.
It's really pretty classic bourbon. I get vanilla, I get caramel, the mainstays. A little bit more of a burn, not because of the proof, but I would not have thought this is a wheated bourbon. I would have thought it was rye.
So I don't dislike it. I like it. I do think it would be better as a mixer, or at least with some ice or water or something. I probably should pour some water in there and try it again. It seems a little one-dimensional to me, maybe two-dimensional.
Okay,
but a little bit not as complex as some of the ones we've been trying recently. And maybe that's just because I had some, great Mexican food today and for lunch. Who knows? But very interesting. I like it. I just don't know if it would be the bottle that I'd reach for.
At $45, it's not a bad bottle.
Hey, there you go.
It's a very reasonable price.
One of the things that people talk about Kentucky bourbon, they talk about the limestone water. They talk about the weather, which we talked about the 4 seasons in one day here in Kentucky. Do you think that plays a part in not being as complex as some other Kentucky bourbons?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Wyoming weather.
We can have 4 seasons in one day here, and that going in and out of the barrel, as opposed to Wyoming, which I assume is just always cold.
I'm sure they have warm summer days. I have been to Wyoming briefly, but we know they have harsh winters.
Right.
And I think of those hot summers as being what is going to work that liquid into the char, into the wood, and then the winter comes along and pulls it back out and pulls that flavor out with it. But I don't dislike this whiskey at all.
Hey, if you're from Wyoming or you're a chemist or distiller, and you know the answer to these questions we're asking, please let us know. We'd appreciate it. Well, fellas, should we fire up the second one?
Let's do it.
Tell us about this one.
Well, this one, we talked about wheated bourbon with Wyoming. Not sure if it is or isn't. This one is very prominent on the label. It says the Wheater.
The Wheater. Straight
out of French Lick, Indiana, which is very close to Kentucky. Alan Bishop is the master distiller there. He's very vocal about how his distillate process and the bourbons and different liqueurs that he creates. So it's been a while since I've had this bourbon, so I'm interested to see how this compares to Wyoming's bourbon.
So I've told the story. I took my wife up to French Lick. French Lick is it was a big resort destination, and then it wasn't, and now it is again. There's 2 huge hotels up there, and I learned that there was a distillery in French Lick. I knew there was a winery that's has some pretty good product. Went up to French Lick with no expectations at all and was really knocked out. I thought they had a lot of great products. They don't restrict themselves to anything. Alan doesn't refer to himself as a master distiller. He refers to himself as chief alchemist.
Right.
We interviewed him, I don't know, about a year ago for a podcast. Interesting guy, very knowledgeable. Came out of Copper and Kings Brandy Distillery in Louisville. So he does bourbon. He does
brandies.
Brandy, absolutely.
Absinthe.
Gins.
Yep.
Absinthe. He's not afraid of anything.
He's not.
Wow. This one is completely, I'm sorry, fellas. This one is so completely different. I couldn't stop talking about it. Really good. And now this one is complex to me. This one has more layers to it.
This is clearly a weeder.
This is a weeder.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very good. Got some earthy notes on the back end to me. But Alan, he is an interesting guy. We're speaking to him, and he is a true historian. He when we were there, he told us the history of Indiana bourbon. I was just amazed by the rich history in that county of different bourbon people. Most of their bourbon labels are named after influential bourbon people in that community, like Lee Sinclair. There's some others that weren't bourbon people. They just
kind of infamous characters
in that area. That
is my new
don
goal
a
in
label.
life, to have a bourbon named after me.
Well, you have to do some interesting things, like some of the people in French Lick did back in the day to get a label, Brent.
I'm okay with not being named, not having a bourbon named after.
So unlike the Wyoming whiskey, I'd put this on ice. I'd have this as a sipper. I don't think it's going to fare that well in a cocktail unless you really need something very, very, very mild.
Yes, it is very mild. It comes at 90 proof. I think it's a little more complex than the Wyoming bourbon we just tried, but I would agree. I would put it on the rocks.
Yeah.
Yep. Very good. I like this one a lot. I like that one a lot. What's next, fellas?
Next, we got Woodinville Bourbon out of Washington State. This is a relatively new bourbon. It's actually got bought out by Diageo. It comes in at 90 proof. They're very forefront on their website that they don't have a 100-year-old story. They don't have all the rich history that some other distilleries in Kentucky and other places do. But their passion is just creating a good craft spirit, which they have. It's won numerous awards, and that's why Diageo bought them out a few years ago.
This is a 90 proof?
90 proof.
Okay. Mild?
I don't get much on the nose.
Not a whole lot. What'd you say the proof of this one was?
90 proof.
90. Pretty mild. I think you're right.
I kind of like it.
Yeah. You could drink this all day.
I think this is my favorite thus far.
This is a little sweetness to it there.
Smoother, I think, than the last one. I can see why it would win some awards.
And I think this is also a reasonably priced bourbon, isn't it?
It's about the same price point, about 50.
Okay.
And they do have a couple of other SKUs available. I believe they have two others, a rye whiskey, and then they have a single barrel, which is a little bit higher.
By the way, I know this says straight bourbon whiskey, so this would be a Washington straight bourbon
There
whiskey.
you go. That's interesting. I like that one. I may have to have that one on the shelf.
Don't you just love finding a drinkable $45 bottle
On the shelf every day that you don't have to.
It's so awesome.
Yeah. So this next one, these last three have interesting stories, but I think the last one we're going to try really has a good story.
Oh, yeah.
So we talked about MGP.
Yeah, we did.
Here we go.
Okay. So this is George Remus. And George Remus was talking about a remarkable story. George Remus lived in the 1920s. He was a lawyer, a very successful criminal defense lawyer in Chicago. I have heard that he was a pioneer in the not guilty by reason of insanity defense. Right. He was also trained as a pharmacist. And during Prohibition, whiskey was available as a medicinal product. I know it's a big joke, but your corner drugstore could sell you a pint every couple of weeks if you had a prescription from your doctor. So with his background as a pharmacist, he started acquiring stocks of whiskey, and they say that he had he would arrange for his gangs to hijack his whiskey when it was traveling on the road. He moved out of Chicago, which was pretty mobbed up at the time, relocated to Cincinnati, which put him in close proximity to Kentucky warehouses where this semi-illegal product was being stored. And he would steal his own whiskey from himself and then bootleg it, I'm sure, at much higher prices. And to some, he was the king of the bootleggers. And Brent, you think that he might.
Rumored to have been the inspiration for The Great Gatsby.
Yeah, so The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald novel. Gatsby lived in a mansion on Long Island and through these lavish parties, and seemed to have made all of his money through something illicit. It's been a long time
As
since
did
I read it.
Remus. Remus would give away mink coats and jewels and Lincolns and that sort of thing at all of his parties. So it certainly is possible.
So Remus ended up getting arrested, being charged with bootlegging, convicted. His defense was that he was not guilty by me. Oh, I think someone who was in, I'm thinking, am I going to get this right? So he had a cellmate, and the cellmate turned out to be an undercover federal agent. I don't know if the FBI existed by the 1920s. I thought it maybe came around in the early 30s. At any rate, this was a federal agent. And the federal agent learned from his cellmate, that Remus had deeded over a lot of his assets to his wife.
Right.
The federal agent gets released, goes and romances the wife, starts an affair with her, and I think trying to get his hands on all that money and all those assets. Remus gets out of jail, hunts down his wife, shoots her. Is charged, convicted. He pleads not guilty by means of insanity. He's put into an institution, and using his knowledge of the insanity plea, convinces them that he is now sane and gets himself released.
Yeah. And becomes the national go-to for everyone else who tries to use the insanity plea.
So an amazing character, and MGP has named one of their handful of proprietary house branded products after George Remus.
And I don't know that this is coincidence. It's 122.5%, so it's hot.
Proof.
Yeah, proof. I said percent. So 122.5 proof. Okay. So it's going to be a little spicy. And I've had this once or twice before. This is my bottle, and I remember it being a nice wake up call.
It's got a really nice nose on it.
Mm-hmm. I believe this was a barrel pick that I bought at Justin's House of Bourbon.
It's good. A little hot on the back end, I think, but
oh yeah,
doesn't taste like a 120 proof.
No,
I definitely would want at least ice with this. For me,
I'm liking it right now, but ice is my friend, and I like a cold beverage anyway.
Right.
This is really nice.
Wow. Pretty good.
MGP evidently knows what they're doing. Why they made $257 million in profits last year.
Okay, I'm going to say of these four, this is absolutely. I think my preference is reverse order of how we tried them. I think Remus by far and away is my favorite. With the what was the name of the Woodinville as my second. So yeah, these are all good, but I think the last two are keepers for sure.
Today and today only, I'm going to say that the Woodinville is my favorite of these three. I really enjoyed it a lot. I'm going to say that the George Remus is my second favorite, and the Weeder and the Wyoming maybe tied for third.
Yeah,
all of them good. All decent non-Kentucky bourbons. I wouldn't turn any of them away, especially if my friend poured it for me, bought it, and pushed it across the table. No, I would drink any of these any day.
You're right. They're all very good. But I'm with Brent. I would say the reverse order is my order today. And, of course, your palate's always changing. I thought Cooper's Craft was absolutely terrible. And then we come in here to a blind tasting, and I pick it number one. I still think you guys rigged that thing. But
I've never heard this story before.
I'm sorry. Did he say we just rigged this? So you know what that means. In an upcoming episode, we will have Cooper's Craft make a return appearance to the Still Bourbon podcast.
Let's do it.
We'll see what happens.
I think we should do? I think we should do Kentucky versus the rest of the states and see how Kentucky bourbon pairs.
How about this? How about we do a blind Kentucky versus non-Kentucky and see if we can guess which ones are the Kentucky bourbons?
That's going to be tricky. these are good products.
It's going to be stupid. That's the reason why we do it. But yeah, they're all good products, absolutely. And I honestly, I didn't know that Remus was not a Kentucky product until you guys told me it was MGP. So, well, very cool. All right, fellas. Anything else that we need to unload on this episode?
You know, I don't disrespect MGP at all. I wish they offered tours. It's a big old distillery. I just read, I think in Whiskey Advocate very, very recently, that as recently as 2001, it was a defunct distillery, and there was a possibility it could have gotten torn down. And then something like 10 years later, MGP Ingredients buys it and turns it into just a powerhouse. That's I don't know what their output is. I don't know how it compares. I've seen pictures of the building, a huge brick building. They clearly know what they're doing up there.
Yeah, they do. Absolutely.
They do. And one of the things that I learned about the Campari and Wilderness Trail buy is, you know, you look at that $420 million, it's a lot of money, but there's a shortage of 10 to 20-year-old bourbons on the market. And, you know, Wilderness Trail is pretty darn close to being there.
Close.
So any distillery or any facility like MGP that has these higher age bourbons, I mean, they're going to be highly sought after. And there's a lot of people going after that market. And there's only a few people that have those aged barrels in their rick houses.
I took an unopened bottle of Wilderness Trail bourbon over to a friend's house, two couples. He cooked some, what's he call it, gumbo laya, and we ate well, and we had some smoked salmon beforehand. And the Wilderness Trail went down real well. That's one of my favorite brands. I have a lot of favorite brands. I have a lot of favorite grandchildren, you see.
Absolutely.
But Wilderness Trail, good stuff. If you can get your hands on it.
I like that rye that we tried not too long ago, a couple of episodes ago. But, you know, speaking of other brands, there were certainly other non-Kentucky bourbons that we thought about including. Old Elk is a Colorado brand that a lot of people like.
It's out there on the bar right now.
That's right. That's out there right now. I tried to find some Oak and Eden, which has the, I don't know if it's a gimmick or if it actually works. They have a stave, a piece of wood down in the bottle. Who knows? I'd like to try that sometime. Old Scout is from, I believe, West Virginia. Can't wait. I may have to send a little cash with you next time you go to Florida to bring back some of that New Smyrna bourbon, because you know New Smyrna is my second home. I love it down there. It's one of my favorite places.
You did not make it down to Sugar Mill Distillery.
I did not.
We're going down in about 10 days, and we are absolutely going to Sugar Mill. I think they're in their new downtown location. I can't wait to see that cat and see if he remembers us. And maybe we'll do a little interview with him.
Hey, that'd be great. There you go.
Cool.
All right, fellas. Well, we'll ask you one last thing. If you drink, please drink responsibly.